to order. Thank you for those who braved the weather. It is getting colder and colder for being here. I do appreciate it, and welcome to everybody. We will go ahead, and this is a work session, and so we'll have the, let's stand for the pledge. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And a moment of silence, please. Thank you. And Dr. Goller, could we have roll call? Yes.
Mrs. Lohr.
Present.
Mrs. Lauer.
Present.
Ms. Scott.
Here.
Mr. Irwin.
Here.
Ms. Killian. Here. Mrs. Wise. Here. Dr. Powers.
Present. Thank you. Now we have a video presentation.
Hi, I'm Megan Moshak, and I'm a representative from North. And I'm Lily Jensen, and I'm a representative from North. And then we wanted to talk to you today about our plans for October and November. So for October, we had a harvest party, which was led by Jenna Harmon and another group of North representatives from our leadership group. And it honestly was a big hit. We had a big turnout, a lot of people showed up. And also we had the Jeep Trunk or Treat, which was led by the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. Their group took place with that. And then the drive-through trunk or treat, we had a bunch of volunteers go out to that at the fairgrounds, and they helped out. And then yesterday, actually, we had a blood drive, which we got a lot of blood, a lot of hours with that. A lot of people tried to donate blood, and yeah, October was a really good month for us.
It was, yes. And then our plans for November, we're going to try to create baskets for families in need because it's getting cold, holidays are coming up. We really want to try and get good holidays in for these families that need it. And so we're going to try to get in touch with locally owned bakeries and places. I know I've already started emailing them on things they can give us, donations, and then we're also going to get in touch with groups around the school to organize drives, like food drives, canned good drives. We're going to try and get water bottles for these people, and then we're also, me personally, we're getting in touch with ministries from churches who have like crocheting and quilting, and they can make little like gloves and scarves and hats for these people. And so as of right now, I'm leading that group for November, started on it already, and then we have a couple more people helping me on that.
Yes, and then also we have just actually made a Remind, and that's basically an app that will get us in touch with everyone in our leadership group. And our group has expanded a lot, and we were going to do a Canvas, but that was going to be too complicated, so this is a more efficient way to get the word out about volunteer opportunities, and other events like that.
And then we've also created a Terre Haute North Leadership Instagram page. Woo! We have 2 posts, and as of right now, a cumulative of 128 followers.
And it's still growing. It's still growing. And also, we have a big hiking drive that we're wanting to plan and propose to all 3 schools.
And we're planning this, right now it's going to be one of our bigger events, and so we're going to add this into our December events as well. And we're going to invite with all the 3 schools, as Lily mentioned. We're going to work on this all throughout November, and then
Yeah, and we really want to get in touch with those other student representatives like ourselves that are kind of leading the charge over at West and South, because we think that it'll be a bigger deal for all 3 of us to come together as one community rather than to show sides. Yeah, and just become one.
create one big, better community as our mission is. And so yeah, that's been our plans for November and October so far. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, President Lauer, Superintendent Hayworth, and other members of the board. We are Makai Moore,
Christian Rose, and then Vine Tran.
So for our October project, we had a trunk or treat last night where we had donations from students and staff members here at Saratoga South. It basically consisted of a lot of seniors, and there were some juniors there, all in our senior parking spots, and we gave candy to kids as they came and walked through. A lot of us dressed up in costumes, and it was a lot of fun, and we had a lot of participation.
For our November project, we are doing a Thanksgiving baskets for families in need. Going on with that, so what we're doing is we're asking for donations from local businesses as well as family, and then around November break is where we'll start packing everything together into November baskets and then handing them out to about maybe 20 to 30 families. So that's our project for November.
Good evening, President Lauer, Superintendent Hayworth, and members of the board. I'm Madeline Harris.
I'm Daisy Dyer,
And I'm Jack Messer.
and we're students at Westfield High School.
We'd like to invite you to our upcoming events at Westfield High School. Our first three home girls basketball games in the Green Dome are November 2nd, 4th, and our game versus Terre Haute South is November 9th at 6 p.m. We would also like to invite you to our Veterans Day program at November 10th at 10 a.m.
Our October project will be held on October 29th, and this is a project that we've done many, many years in the past. We've had hundreds and hundreds of kids come. It's our safe trick or treat here at Westfield High School, where kids walk the hallways and knock on doors and trick or treat. And this year, starting now, NHS is planning a haunted hallway for the kids as well. So we plan this is going to be a very big event. We can't wait to share the details with you.
Our November project includes another annual project. Our FCCLA does baskets of cheer for the Thanksgiving time for families in need. It includes turkeys and canned goods. And starting in November, we will also be planning for our Christmas light extravaganza, December 15th, which is a huge end of the semester drive-through for families with Christmas lights.
Thank you for your time, and we look forward to sharing our details and thank you.
How are the students doing with the Team Vigo project?
They're doing very well. It's funny now to watch them now work, not in isolation, north, south, and west, but now starting to come together, to work together. I actually heard my son say the other day, those students from North aren't too bad. We're getting somewhere.
It's so nice to hear them give a report, and I would like to have heard their hours. So that was wonderful, that challenge that you made, because it's good that they're all coming together. They do. They work together. That's what's nice. It's good to hear from them.
Before we leave that, just a couple things that as we think about that group and, trying to develop them as future leaders, trying to have them think about this as a place to live. We have one more trip remaining in January that we will be making with our teams. Would love to invite members of the board because we'll be spending some time with some of our legislators in Indianapolis and, kind of sharing our story with some of those state reps. So it's a fun day, so if you get a chance to get away, please come be with us.
More details later.
Yeah.
Right, and on with our ESSER federal funds report.
President Lauer, Superintendent Hayward, and members of the board. We're here this evening to tell you a little bit about what's going on with SR Funds. We hear that in the news and we hear people talking about it, and wanted to kind of share how those funds are being used and what the process might be with that. So when COVID first hit us, we were notified that we were going to get some CARES dollars, and the funds were coming in to help assist with what was going on in regards to COVID-19 at the time. And so we were able to take those funds and apply for them. The way that they put that out, though, was through the Title I grant. So you didn't have to be a Title I school in order to receive the funds, but that was the process that we used in order to ask for the funds, because it was a well-established website. There was a lot of stipulations in regards to how you put the funding in there, and there was a lot of oversight with the Title I grant funding process. And so after lots of consideration and trying to figure out what we were going to do with the first bit of money, we were able to do, put some funding in there to get some Chromebooks and to look at what we needed in order to roll out what we were doing instructionally, because it was so different. And I know Dr. Go is going to share a little bit more about that in just a minute, but I just wanted to kind of talk through that process. So once we found out the dollar amount that we were getting, conversations took place, and then we had to actually go into the grant itself and line by line lay out what we were going to do with those fundings. And once that was submitted at the state level, there were grant administrators that would go through that grant and ask questions and then push it back. And I was generally the person who was putting the funding into the formula, just because I had worked with a Title I grant for a number of years. And so I understood the process, I understood the format, those kinds of things. So I would submit the grant, they would ask questions and push it back to me. I would resubmit the grant and they would ask more questions, but everything had to be lined out in particular lines there. So once we started that, it actually was May 7th of 20 when we first had access to the grant. We got that started right away. It wasn't until 6/31 that we got the direct approval. So it went through a process at the state level where the Title I grant coordinator would go through it, ask those questions, and they would push it up another level, and then there's somebody at a higher level at the state that would approve that. After that took place and we saw, perhaps we weren't going to spend quite so much in a certain line item, we'd actually have to do an amendment. We just can't move money from one pot to another. I would have to request an amendment, get approval from the state in order to make those funds move. And then anytime we did spend that money, we actually had a drawdown that would come back to us. We request the money, we say, yep, this is what we said we were going to pay for, this is what we paid for, and now we're asking for the money to be reallocated to the schools. And so there's a very precise plan in the way that we do that. And then luckily we started hearing about more money coming to us, and there was lots of talk about that. So SR2 came along, and there was quite a bit of funding in regards to that, and that was kind of the following year in April of 21 that we were able to have conversations about how to help our students and help instruction, because things were still difficult in regards to with COVID. So again, with conversations at the central office level, but also conversations with the community and with our principal groups. Every time we would meet, or at that time we were having a lot of virtual meetings, the conversations would be, what do you need in order to provide instruction for our children? What is it that we need to have? The only stipulation really that was there was, it had to meet the needs of children, it had to meet the confines of COVID. We actually had to post a re-entry plan. So the plan was that we had to tell them, how are we going to get back to school in a normal fashion? And so there was a misconception out there that in order to get COVID relief and get CARES dollars, we actually had to mandate masks. That's not what it was. It was we had to have a plan in place in order to receive the funding. It was not a mandate in any sense, but in regards to getting that funding, we had to have a plan in place. So again, we had principals involved in this, we had teachers involved at the school levels as to what things that they needed, and we also had a thought exchange that was taking place. I know Mr. Riley has done a great job in regards to that, but putting things out so that we could get feedback from other people in the community as to how we could do that. So again, we submitted for SR2. I would get pushback. We put some things in line items. They would ask, well, why are you doing that? I even put, we're going to buy Chromebooks. Well, that wasn't good enough. How many Chromebooks are you going to buy? How much do they cost? So everything was kind of in there. But what happens is, even if we plan for the best, it doesn't always happen how we plan. So it could be that we needed more Chromebooks or we needed less Chromebooks. So again, we could request an amendment, make changes. I can't just take the money out of one pot, throw it over here because I want more Chromebooks. It had to be requested from the state level. And so that's why you see 3 of us up here right now, because it didn't take one person to put this on and have it. But in regards to SR2, let's see, I had it's like about 8 revisions that we had to submit in order to make changes and make moves. And then SR3, where we're thrilled to be able to get that coming to us so that we can continue on. And again, the same process. It's through the Title I federal grant application process, and we all work together to try to get that in line items and make sure that we're putting it where it is. The difficult part of that is, so one of the things we looked at was summer school. So we're planning for 3 years of summer school. We're going to have to do an amendment. It's hard to guess how many kids are going to come to summer school or how many teachers we need. We have some history in regards to what summer school looks like, but we really expanded what we were doing. So again, the amendment process is there so that we look at the funding that we put aside for certain activities, and it has a process that goes through, but there is an amendment application that we can put in to make changes as we see that happening.
So can I ask a question, just maybe clarifying? So for all 3 of those federal funds, CARES, ESSER, and ESSER3, we apply, that application is reviewed, sent back to, and sent back to us for correction, and submitted again, and cannot move until final approval is given.
That's correct.
And even then, you have to spend the money and then you're reimbursed, correct?
Absolutely.
Yes.
I would like to give some examples of the, as you see up here on this slide, the allowable uses of CARES, ESSER2, and ESSER3. You see there are 4 primary uses. Some of the specific ways that we have used funds for the technology item, which is the 4th item, has already been mentioned. All of our students in grades K through 12 have been supplied with Chromebooks, and we very much thank Doug Miller, our IT department, as well as our technology resource teachers for a very successful rollout of that. Along with our Chromebooks, we purchased Canvas licenses with those funds. All of our teachers, all of our students did receive a license for a learning management system that during remote learning they were working in entirely in that environment. And then now, as we have moved to both digital learning and in-person learning, they're using that Canvas license in the blended learning environment. We also, with the first round of CARES money, because we had students at home that did not have access to the internet, as well as students that did have access to the internet, but wanted to have some in-person learning as well, we purchased a large amount of curricular materials. We worked with our principals, we worked with our teachers, and we purchased materials that were aligned with the core curriculum. So they were part of our core curriculum, and they were supplementary products that students could use at home that helped our teachers because they didn't have to Xerox packets for parents to come pick up. Those materials were simply given to students to take home and use at home. And they were quality materials. We were very, very grateful and thankful that we had these CARES dollars in that first round that we could use for those purchases. Things like a Wonders 2020 practice book that went with our reading series, Everyday Math Skills Links workbook, Everyday Math at Home games kits, the Family Math and Literacy packets for health and wellness calendar activities, and then social studies investigation activity cards. So very grateful to have that support. And then in terms of another allowable use, which is accelerated learning, we have numerous examples for that, but I'll just mention a few of those. One of the things that we have tried to do as a curriculum group, instructional group, with our teachers and principals is look at what is the research saying now about making up that loss after the pandemic. And some of the leaders out there, Douglas Fisher, Nancy Fry, John Hattie, the well-known educational researchers are saying, try not to call it learning loss so much, because that has kind of a negative implication with it. Try to say more about accelerating learning and try to look at what you're doing in terms of aligning your instruction and looking at what needs to be taught most in those grade levels. In other words, not going back to if a student's in fourth grade and teaching all the third grade material, because then you're not going to get caught up with the fourth grade material. But instead, looking at those priority standards in third grade and how they move right into the priority standards in fourth grade and how that lesson moves together. In other words, it is spiraled from third grade to fourth grade, and those priority skills need to be continued and mastered in the fourth grade. So we have a great team that is working on that. They're taking our pacing guides and looking at the primary emphasis for daily instruction. We have two kinds of formative assessments that we use. We have a clear sight assessment, which looks at language, arts, and math and how our students are performing. And the teachers are looking at that data and then targeting the instruction to meet those needs. They're not just assuming they don't know this. They're looking at what they really are showing that they need more instruction in and then targeting the instruction to meet that. We've also had, in terms of accelerated learning, after-school tutoring program. We had last spring 1,184 elementary students. We had 200 students in grades 6 to 8, 83 students in grades 9 to 12, for a total of 1,467 students, so quite a few in the after-school program. Of those students, 609 were provided with bus transportation every day, as well as school snacks. We had an elementary and a middle summer school program. We had over 500 students that participated. They had a choice of in-person or virtual. In the elementary Jumpstart program that Dr. Fenton and the principals implemented, there were 1,300 elementary students that attended an 8-day Jumpstart program, and CARES funding provided for transportation. We also had our high school students that were able to earn credit, and they attended the entire month of June. We had over 200 students that were enrolled, and transportation was provided. I really want to compliment our teachers who have been working on, again, in terms of the accelerated learning. As we've come back into school this fall, they have designed bell ringer activities. And what these are problems of the day. And we have these in grades K through 5. It enables teachers to discuss math content. They share problem-solving strategies. They apply math thinking, while still allowing the teachers to cover all the math standards in terms of the pacing guide. So they're reinforcing those content areas that the students need most, and they're continuing on. Also, we had the opportunity to apply for a student learning recovery grant, and what we've been able to do is use some additional CARES funding to provide in-person activities, because our teachers are back in the classroom and the students are using hands-on group activities. And so we've provided, through the CARES dollars, more hands-on materials for them. And then another item up here is sustainable innovation. We tried to look through an equity lens in terms of digital instruction. Are students in all schools receiving quality digital instruction from teachers? And so we've been able, and we appreciate Dr. Hayworth as well as Mrs. Wilson and others who have allowed our teacher leaders to move forward another year. And so these teacher leaders, one in every building, so that, again, it's that equity idea. every student in those buildings will have access to a quality teaching experience with digital learning because we have an expert in every building. And thanks to this money, that will continue in the next couple of years. And then finally, we really want to look very, very carefully at quality teaching and high impact strategies in terms of accelerated learning, supporting educators, and sustaining innovation, because we want to be able to implement strategies that will, quote, stick, that will remain in our classrooms, because we want them to be investments that are backed by research. And so we've worked with a tremendous digital consulting firm in Indianapolis to look at some of the strategies that will deepen learning in our classrooms, like reflecting intentionally, thinking critically, sparking curiosity, creativity, amplifying student voices, how to collaborate better, how to produce quality work. So using our Chromebooks, we were able to provide more professional development for our teachers because we purchased those Chromebooks. That was a part of that package. And so we were able to provide some quality professional development so that good teaching strategies continue to be in our classroom and that give our students those skills that they'll need for better college and careers as they move forward. So we really want to think intentionally about what we're doing with the learning and make sure that we are providing the very best in terms of instructional delivery.
Thank you for the opportunity for us to get in front of you this evening and present. I think that it's really interesting to point out that these funds, as Christy said, we were quite surprised when we got the initial allocation, and we're excited to get $3.5 million for the first round of CARES, and then to be followed up with $13.5 million and another $30 million. As you can imagine, this is a very fluid process, so we want to point that out. And one thing that Dr. Goldner and Christy both talked about is that we had to look at sustainability of these programs. So as we briefly, I'm going to give you a rundown of what we've done with the funds, what our emphasis was, and then we'll look at the balances that remain in those. But the first fund, obviously the CARES Fund, came to us. It was pretty unrestricted. It was to react to the COVID pandemic, obviously, and the closure of school. And our immediate reaction was to look at how do we deliver instruction in the best way because our schools were closed. So we initially expedited the rollout of Chromebooks, and you've heard that discussed a lot. We had GeoBond dollars in place to do a 4-year transition to one-to-one, and we did that in the matter of a year. So these funds were very beneficial and crucial to that rollout. The initial $3.5 million, we spent about $2 million on Chromebooks in the initial round. We spent about $1 million in virtual school courseware. And keep in mind, in the first year of the pandemic, in 2021, actually when we returned to school, we had, I think, between 500 and 600 students enrolled in our virtual programs. As Karen touched on, we put out learning packets for students. We had packets delivered. We had textbook drop-off, pickup. We had a variety of methods to get materials into the hands of students. And that was basically how we went about addressing the first $3.5 million. You'll find on a later slide, we're down to about $28,000 remaining in the CARES Fund. These are all separate and distinct funds, too, in our chart of accounts. In the CARES Fund, we have about $28,000 that has not been expended out of the original allocation. That allocation is good until 9/30 of 22, that we could draw those funds down. And the majority of those funds are allocated to our non-public schools that had to be part of our rollout of these federal funds. Then we move on to SR2. SR2, the funding period. That's one thing that's interesting about all three of these awards. The funding period goes back and reverts back to March 13th of 2020. It all keys off of the emergency declaration date. So we were encouraged to go back and look backwards. And if you'll remember that when we initially met, we talked about putting in an application for FEMA assistance. And a lot of those FEMA costs we gathered And it was a substantial amount of money, the expenses that we incurred during the initial shutdown. And then FEMA, along those lines, they rejected our original application and said that we didn't have a case of COVID that we were mitigating. So they suggested using other funds to cover those costs. And one of those ways we were to recover some funds that were expended out of both our education and operations fund was to use SR2 and SR3 dollars, because both of them refer back to the 3/13 date for the start. SR2 funds, we can expend those through 9/30 of 23. I think sometimes we don't realize how many school years that is, but we've allocated those budgets to be set aside and drawn down over time. We continued our rollout of Chromebooks out of SR2 because obviously there wasn't enough money in CARES, and we spent over $3.5 million to fulfill the Chromebook initiative. We did a stipend payment to staff for the inconvenience and challenges of our shutdown period. We bought a substantial amount of PPE and continue to have a budget within the SR2 fund to pay for PPE, face masks, hand sanitizer, all those things that we supply our staff and students with. We looked at virtual school staff and curriculum. Those were allowable costs under SR2, and in fact, that was one of the primary goals of SR2 was to look at your virtual learning environment. We continued the after-school, or we instituted really the after-school remediation program out of the SR2 funds because CARES had already been exhausted. We included a significant portion, around $1 million, for HVAC improvements and upgrades. There are several things that improve air quality. They're very specific. The projects are very specific in nature, and those were in the application, and we have an amount allocated for those projects within SR2. And then we have a component that we added in that was student attraction and retention, where we're looking at the early college initiative. And that is budgeted for a 3-year program as long as the SR2 funds are available. So it's important that we look at that. We'll show where we're at. I think we have about $4 million that's not encumbered, and that out of $13.5 million. And those funds, again, are good through the 22-23 school year. Okay. And then finally, SR3. SR3 was more, I think, of a shock to everyone. The amount of money passed through SR3, we're at $30 million. We sat down as a group, as Christy talked about, and really looked at what we could use those funds for to make a significant impact. Those funds are good through 9/30 of 24. So we added another school year on there. And I think that as we progress through the ESSER and CARE projects, you could see that CARES, we really reacted to the pandemic. ESSER2, we were still reactionary but proactive, and ESSER3, we've had more flexibility to be proactive and plan. How do we address accelerated learning, as Dr. Fowler stated, and those types of initiatives to get our students engaged in a different way. So we have budgeted the entire virtual school initiative within ESSER3 now moving forward through 23-24. And have even included monies in ESSER2 and 3 to develop our own in-house curriculum. We have after-school and summer school programs continue to be budgeted through ESSER3. We have light speed and stop-it licenses, and those are things that our counselors use. We've added additional staff to reduce class size. One thing that we did have happen to us this year, and Christy can attest to it, is that at the beginning of the school year, we were surprised at our kindergarten numbers. Our kindergarten enrollment was up, probably partially due to the fact that it was down last year. And we had to add some teacher contracts to reduce class size. We've added other sections of other classes. We have some temporary contracts that are out there. We've added teachers in key areas to try to be more limit the class size so there could be more intensive instruction, and those are included in the ESSER3 budget. We established the Early Learning Center, and those programs were funded, the startup to all those costs were funded through SR3, and we're looking at the pre-K salaries that are allocated there now, and some additional kindergarten classes. We continue to support additional deans and counselors in our buildings as we look at those ways that we need to intervene, offer interventions for our at-risk students. And we have extensive building funds, building improvement funds set aside to be used and allocated as we move forward through the next 3 years of that grant fund. So where we stand right now, I didn't flip the slide, but you can see that those are the things that I touched on. And right now, the grant status as of today, you can see CARES is pretty much expended, $28,000, and I guarantee you we will make sure that we draw the final amount on that and allocate our expenditures there. ESSER2, 13.5 million. We've expended 9.4 million and have just over 4 million left in that. And remember, that goes through 23. And ESSER3, now ESSER3, one thing that I don't know that we touched on is ESSER3, as the funds progressed, they seem to add more, they became more broad in their use. ESSER3 allowing the most had the most language in it about building improvements and air quality. But ESSER3 also contained a set-aside. The set-aside was a 20% set-aside to directly address learning loss. And the initial budget application, that they would let you apply for the learning loss component alone. And we submitted a budget for 6.7 million that was approved. Keep in mind that those expenditures last over actually 4 school years, because we could go back to 2021 all the way through 23-24. And right now, the remainder of the budget was submitted, I believe, in September. They have, their process is pretty stringent. They bring questions to Christy. Christy brings them to the rest of the group. We revise, we refine, and those have been set back up, and we're in the final review stages somewhere. And when that happens, then we will post, and I will put some more contracts and things on that, and I can imagine that we will have a significant drawdown of those funds. One other thing to remember is we, in previous meetings, had more funds encumbered in ESSER3, but Mr. Miller, working with our E-rate people, our Universal Service Fund discounts, and AdTech, who does our E-rate reporting, the state did release emergency connectivity grant funds, and those funds were available for us, and we did, Mr. Miller and our representative from AdTech applied for those funds. So the entire amount of the kindergarten Chromebooks, which I believe were $372,000, will be 100% funded by emergency connectivity grant dollars, along with the last group of hotspots that we ordered. So those had to be removed from the ESSER3 line, and that goes back to what Christy said. It's consistently fluid, it's always moving. So we will have to look at that and decide of a revision on those dollars and revise those and reallocate as appropriate as we move through this process. So with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions or address anything that you would like.
I'll start maybe with you. When you think about academic interventions, Dr. Doerr, can you think of 1 or 2 programs that you would highlight for us that you think, boy, these really made a difference?
Sure. I would point to right now our 4 IE coaches. We have a program where in elementary we're looking at, again, our formative assessment data. What are the needs that our students have in language arts and math? And we're looking at that time during the day. It's called enrichment and intervention time. And so we're looking at what is the very best instruction that we can give to students during that time period so that they can move ahead in their regular programming. And I just cannot compliment the teachers, the IE coaches enough for how they're really being intentional with that time. The materials that they're using that we have purchased through CARES and ESSER dollars to target that learning in the very best way for those students. That would be one example. And then, of course, all the extended learning that's gone on after school in the summer, that's been a tremendous benefit.
I might add too, the early learning program, several of our board members actually were able to go and visit Deming Early Learning Center. And because last year so many parents kept their children home, they didn't send them to kindergarten last year because of the fear of COVID. We had a much larger class this year, and so we were able to fund a lot of that Deming Early Learning startup in regards to ESSER funds as well. And the other piece of this that will come back later on too is there's a very strong audit that comes to Vigo County every year because we receive so much in Title I funds to begin with. Each year we are audited in the spring, in which they pull purchase orders, they pull timesheets, they pull stipends, and they check to make sure we are doing exactly what we said we were doing. And they check that each year, and we have passed with flying colors every year, and I anticipate we will continue to do that.
When she says they, she means State Board of Accounts have people that are specific towards federal funds.
And it's every other year that's close.
Yeah,
It just takes a long time.
Donna, any areas that you have run into where the attempt to try to use COVID dollars was rejected?
I don't know that they were rejected. I think they were probably refined because I think that we need to be careful to make sure that we draw the line between what we were already doing and what we are doing in addition to. And I think that we've tried to ramp up some of those things so that we address maybe more, provide more intensive training and spotlight areas a little differently. I think that one thing that, we worked very closely with legal counsel also, because when all this money comes at you, it is a lot to navigate. And the reporting guidelines and the application guidelines were quite stringent. So as we've tried to navigate that, we've engaged legal counsel's advice to make sure that we don't have any subsequent audit issues. And that's one thing that's been a little challenging. I think that they've been clear in their emphasis in certain areas, and the virtual school was a big emphasis. How to deliver instruction, whether in person or virtually. And so I think that, I think sometimes we lose sight of how much money some of these programs are on an ongoing basis. But this has, through these funds and the strategic use of these funds, we have freed up other dollars to address other things, especially with our GO bond money, just simply by not buying Chromebooks and technology. Technology is a huge component of this, so the infrastructure, technology infrastructure and upgrades, this is a great method to get a lot of those put into place that we would have had to parcel out over time.
Board questions?
Do you expect it'll take the full amount of time to spend that money down?
It's such a work in progress, yes, it's a moving target some days. Just like when Doug and I talked to our ad tech rep, and there was about $500,000 that we had on this, that we intended to spend from this, that then became eligible for emergency connectivity money. And obviously, we don't want to pass up those opportunities. Yes, and I mean, I think that there's some real opportunities to look at larger projects that we may have coming down the pipe if those dollars are needed. Because we do have crowding issues and we do have HVAC issues.
One of the pushbacks that we did get, we put $12 million into construction costs, and the questions were, what do you mean? What are you gonna do with it? And it's hard to plan that out 3 years, particularly when we're looking at a referendum and not knowing what some of our construction costs are going to be until we know what's happening with that. So that's another possibility for another amendment, depending on what happens with the referendum. What are we gonna do with that construction money and how are we gonna use that? So that's another change that will probably happen.
But just know we'll have to do a detailed submission on what the intent is and how it falls under the SR3 guidelines.
Did you say with the 28,000 that's remaining in CARES that was specified to be used a certain way?
Some of it belongs to our non-public schools, and maybe you could address.
Yeah, so when the CARES money first came out, there's a certain percentage that even with Title I funds, we actually oversee funding that goes to our non-public schools. And they get a percentage of that I oversee. And so that same percentage out of CARES was put towards our non-public schools, and they used a lot of that money for PPE and some virtual kinds of things.
They bought Chromebooks.
They bought Chromebooks, yeah, some of them did that as well. Now, when we came to SR2 and SR3, we did not have the requirement to provide to the non-publics because they were getting funded on their own.
So did the non-public institutions have to be specific in what they used it?
Yeah.
Did that report go to you, or did
Yeah,
it go straight?
everything goes right through us, all the purchasing that goes through, they don't buy that on their own and then get reimbursed. It goes right through our process and our purchase orders, just like we buy something for the Vanny School, we buy it for another school, but it just happens to be a non-public school. So we oversee those funds.
And the budget is very specific. It's broken down regular programming, special programming, summer, remediation, facilities, and then we have to spend it in the specific category, be it salaries, be it contracted services, be it supplies, be it equipment, in order to legitimately draw it. Because then we report on a monthly basis and ask for reimbursement. So we have to actually expend the funds and then draw them down. And if we don't have a budget there, then we have to do an amendment, ask them to amend. So if employee benefits is a little higher than anticipated on contracts, and we don't have enough in the benefit column, we can't draw it down until we reallocate the budget. It's very, very specific.
Well, thank you for your dedication to do all of that and stick to activity, because that is rough. That's rough. But, any other questions or comments from the board? We did enjoy being at the Early Learning Center.
Yes,
That was
that was
just
wonderful.
amazing. And the fact that you have a waiting list, and it is just, it's such an opportunity for parents to take advantage of the small children. It was just well loved.
We anticipated having maybe 100 children there this first year as we got started, and it's closer to 300 this year, so.
Right, I know. That's good, that's a good problem to have.
It is.
I don't
Very excited.
complain about that.
I have a question. What is capacity for dinner?
We're pretty close to capacity on it, because the class sizes have to be very small in regards to the ages. We're pretty close. Or we have those waiting lists.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Hayward, you're up.
Thank you. I have 36 seconds now to finish up my. Now, when I think about why board members choose to run, sometimes I think, why would you choose to run? Most of the time, it is to make a difference. And I think that opportunity lies in front of you maybe like never before in my time as a school superintendent. And so we're coming to you tonight to talk about an amended strategic plan. We think about February of 2020. We were very proud of how we developed throughout the fall of 2019, a plan that we can bring to you. We brought that to you, approved it. I think there was some high-fiving that was done. And then 2 weeks later, COVID hit, and a plan that we thought was strategic was not so strategic. Glad it was in place, though. I'm glad we had done some of the homework in regards to bringing a communications position here. Glad we had done some of the homework so that though we were not ready to go one-to-one, we had committees in place that would allow us to get there. So amazing leadership accomplished many of those things that we had set out to do. But now looking back, this approach is much, much different. There's not data points. This is an aspirational strategic plan. If you think about it, I think you all have a copy. If you'll turn that to the very first page, that's a letter from me introducing the plan. If you go a few paragraphs down, you read this from Mark Bennett. As Mark Bennett wrote recently in the Tribune Star, for just the second time since 1910, the city of Terre Haute has fewer than 59,000 residents. That's a problem. The community needs more families with kids who will learn in the Vigo County School Corporation schools, graduate from high school, and then from a college or technical program, get a job here, start their own families, pay taxes, volunteer, and support local businesses. As we were thinking about putting this plan together, we saw Mark's article that hit home to me, because I think we're at a crossroads. We're at a crossroads as a community to say, are we going to lay down and die and let that be our future? Or are we going to attack? Are we going to try to do those things that might reverse that trend? I think we have a very great opportunity to do just that. Look at the amount of higher ed within our communities. Look at all of the resources from the river to the railroad, interstate, airport, trades unions in our communities, growing businesses. We have all the opportunity to stop that trend. Recently, when our General Assembly rewrote or redistricted, showed a map of all of Indiana and the percentage lost in terms of population over the last 10 years. Up and down the west side of the state of Indiana, those bordering Illinois, those counties, all but one shrank. The one that grew, Lake County. I believe we could be an outlier. I think we could be different, and that would call for an uncommon plan, and that's what I presented to you here tonight. At the heart of this plan is 30 plus credentialed hours, or 30 plus certification hours, or 30 plus dual college credit hours as you walk across and get that high school diploma. Can we add greater value? Why do we need to do that? Well, E3 Alliance, which is an educational economic alliance, states this: without a post-secondary credential, you only have a 12% chance of having a job that pays a living wage within 6 years of high school graduation. Also, when I think of this plan, I think of what the governor has charged us to do and what the Lumina Foundation has charged us to do. That this state needs at least 60% of our adults to have a college degree, a certificate, an industry-recognized certificate, or a credential by 2025. And just recently, the Commission of Higher Ed said, hey, we're behind. We're sitting here at 48.5%. I think an uncommon plan like we're going to talk about helps Vigo County get in that race, maybe lead that race. If you go to the next page. How are we going to get there? Our success based upon staffing. Say that again. Our success is based upon staffing. We want our students to thrive, and the only way that's going to happen is if our staff is thriving. So we need to do those things as a team of board members and as administrators. We need to think about salaries and benefits. That's not all our employees are asking for. How can we help them grow professionally? How can we engage them in other quality of life issues? It's just not about salary, don't get me wrong, that's important. But what are those other things that make me want to stay here, raise my family here? Diversity is very important. When we think about uncommon staff, we need a staff that looks like the students that are in their classrooms. So we need to take special effort to try to recruit differently to make sure that that happens. And then staff credentialing, you don't get to those 30 hours doing it the way you've always done it. So we've got to incentivize staff to go out and get those credentials so that they can deliver that content. If you think about a pathway so much needed right now is when we're getting ready to open a casino and a convention center. So how important is hospitality right now, that pathway? We need to be working on those things. That's what this pathway is about. Any questions that I might be able to answer for you as we think about this uncommon staff approach?
The only thing is, it's not a question, it's just more of a clarification, just so you can say it one more time. The 30 hours is not necessarily college credit hours. That can be trades union hours, that can be credentials or certifications to go and to make students more prepared to go directly into the workforce for those who don't want to go to college, correct?
Yeah, exactly. If we walk out of here thinking that that 30 hours is only for that college-bound student, that's a huge mistake. That 30 hours is also for the student that's going into welding, going into some sort of electric work, that student that's going to go into agriculture. And so we need to find those pathways and those credentials that would go along with that, so that when they walk across the stage and you hand them the diploma, Hank, you have a little bit better feel of this student's going to have some success.
Thank you.
You can turn the page. So you need uncommon staff, but you also need uncommon programming. And so I would actually flip the order of this, as we just heard Dr. Fenton speak. When we think about laying the foundation of success, this experiment into early childhood learning, that's uncommon. I can think of maybe 3 places in the state of Indiana that are doing similar things. That's uncommon. That just not helps our employees, not only helps the students that are engaged there, but also helps the workforce within Vigo County. So how do we build more capacity? Don't get me wrong, Dr. Fenner has 15 ways that she's thinking of how to build that capacity. How do we expand partnerships with higher ed? And if you read the Ready Grant, you know we want to partner with Indiana State to do more in this area. And how do we work with the providers that are already out there? How do we increase the size of our team, whether they're part of the school corporation or not? How do we do those public-private types of activities that only benefit our students? As we think then about uncommon program built into blended learning opportunities, I really don't think we'll truly leave blended learning in terms of what it has done to us during COVID. So how do we find those interactive opportunities to engage students in multiple different levels, formats, and opportunities?
Rob, so on the enhancing the high school experience, are we exploring the Earn Indiana grant for the high school internships?
Yes, we
Study?
are.
Okay.
Also thinking about, if we think about our school as our campus, how do we cut down those transitions? We just had a great conversation about, is there an honors college model that works maybe for us on Indiana State's campus, where our students are coming there for maybe a core set of classes? And then Dr. Curtis has been so gracious to help us think about some grant opportunities out there that would just strengthen a K-12 pathway from us to Indiana State.
Well, I was thinking specifically, so Earn Indiana has been focused on apprenticeships and internships, Indiana work study in colleges, but they're expanding it to high school students to be able to do work study that the employers paid half the wage of the students doing those internships. And so I didn't know but that's a grant that has to be applied for this fall.
Yeah, we made application.
Okay.
We did not win it.
Okay,
However, it does not stop us from moving forward.
okay,
So our dominant area is healthcare, because we believe we already have that model set up. Information technology is another pathway that we've identified. We've also identified our own pathway for the creation of teachers, and really creating some very unique opportunities with Dr. Balch in terms of what that would look like. A couple of areas, advanced manufacturing, and today Dr. Mason had told us that Sony and GE had reached out to us, hearing what we were doing, and wants to come and talk to us about apprenticeships there as well.
all right, great, thank you.
So this idea of uncommon finances. What Donna was talking about in terms of the amount of dollars that have flown into our district has just been incredible. I've never seen anything quite like it in my career. I would say there was a great chance that if we would have known in 2019 that those dollars were going to be coming to us in 2020, we may have not pursued an operational referendum. When asked sometimes about, Rob, how can you do that? My pat answer is we've got 47 million reasons to end the operational referendum now that we did not have in 2019. Now, obviously, those dollars are tied to specific things, as you've already seen. But there are dollars there that can impact our operational referenda to where we have a goal of ending that in 2024. It's just not ESSER funds that have allowed us to get there. We've been working. You are sitting in a building that last year was an elementary school. And now it's a functioning central office. It was a fact that our building downtown we sold for $3 million. We were able to recover $1 million from ESG to help us set up this beautiful building. It's also true that we did the work in closing Deming, which you've already heard great success about. Probably if you're a parent of a student at Deming, you're still upset with us. But I think if you ask the neighborhood in and around Deming, we have brought great value to that neighborhood, much the same way I think we've brought great value to this neighborhood. But our work's not done. We have one more building in order to complete our strategic plan. My goal would be that, as you saw that calendar earlier, that we would have a December 1st meeting to have our committee bring that to us. So we have uncommon financing that's allowing us to do some pretty incredible things. And maybe take any questions on this finance section.
So Rob, in the past, I've lived here long enough, we've sold buildings. Oh, we don't need this elementary school anymore, we're gonna sell it. And we we can put that money on the books, like we sold the administration building. What in Indiana prevents us from doing that at this point?
Yeah, so, if you think about the administrative building, it was not a academic building, the business office. So, we were able to sell that building, and there's 2 or 3 ways we could have sold that building, but because we were dealing with another public entity, we were able to do that with really very little hoops to jump through. But let's say we make a selection of closing this another elementary school. I would be coming to the board and asking the board to repurpose it for the betterment of our students in Vigo County, with the understanding that the true cost of that facility are in the people, not in terms of the operation of that building. And so just like we've added value here, and we've added value in Deming, I believe that we can add value to whatever that next building would be. But let's say somebody came to us and said, hey, we'll give you $3 million for that building. I think the board would say, you need to take that. Unfortunately, we cannot. We would have to sit there and allow our building to set for sale for charter schools to come in and purchase that building. I don't remember the dollar amount. At one point, it was for $1 that they could purchase the facility. And so, doing a couple of things. One, creating greater competition for our students. But I think we have a fantastic idea of how we add greater value in the closing of this next elementary to where selling that building really doesn't make much sense. I think that building, much like what you're seeing at Deming, has the opportunity to actually bring money into the district for us. You go to that next page and you think about uncommon facilities. I won't spend a lot of time. We're out there talking about 3 high school projects, potential projects, one that's a $160 million referenda, one that's a $260 million referenda, and one that's a $333 million referenda. We'll be talking about that for the next 2 months. What I would like to talk about is what's directly under that, and it is a career center. This career center was a part of the READY grant, a regional grant that we made application for. If we were able to receive this grant, it would be a 4-to-1 match. For every $4 million that we put into this facility, READY would give us $1 million. And really not tracking this until we got into our spring community meetings. And in those spring community meetings, we started to hear people talk about a career center or a tech center. I believe historically there may have been a high school that was here that at one time maybe was a tech school. And so we kept hearing this theme about having a career center. Well, we want a career center that fits into the 21st century. So we want our career center to be more high-tech, built around fabrication, built around innovation, technology, and engineering. And we would like for it to be located out on the east side of our district. One other piece before we leave. A lot of attention is on the high schools. Remember, we have many other schools under our charge. We cannot just ignore them. So we have begun a process of flipping 150 classrooms. Right now, that's happening at Arter Creek, at Terrytown. Will soon be happening at Wabash and Farrington Grove. And that gets us, I think, about halfway through 150 flip. That's new technology, that's new paint, that's new carpet. It's trying to turn that building that maybe was built in the 1970s or 1990s or early 2000s, to modernize those facilities, staying ahead of the game as we think about those facilities. Any thoughts, questions there?
What does the transportation look like for the kids who are gonna be, doing this as half-day sort of thing?
For the Fight Center?
Yep.
Yeah, so traditional career centers function on half-day programs. So you would have a north bus that would go to the Fight Center, drop students off, pick students up if they were taking the afternoon students, pick students up and then bring them back to school. So you're still having half of your school day at your home school.
Like our building trades, transportation.
One other thing that, as we're thinking about this connection between our community and industry, and I would have you move over to uncommon collaboration. According to a Strata poll, I think in 2017, only 1/3 of today's college students believe they will graduate with the skills and knowledge to be successful in the job market. 34%, or in the workplace, 36%, and only half believe their major will lead to a good job. I think that gives us a charge to do good at the high school, to lay down better foundations so when our college students, who we hope stay here, live here, go to school here, go in and don't make that kind of mistake. If they're going to make that kind of mistake, we want to have them making that mistake at the high school level, not at the collegiate level. Furthermore, and you'll appreciate this one, this speaks to professionalism and our need to connect to the workplace. This is a job outlook study. There's a big gap between student and employer perceptions of workplace preparedness. One recent survey showed 77% of students feel confident about their professionalism and work ethic. Care to guess what the business owners, where they were at with that? Same? Just 43% business owners saw graduates as proficient in these areas. So again, as we're talking about connecting to our employers, connecting to higher ed, there's some of these things that we can definitely be working on. Switch gears just real quick and then I'll be done. Attraction and retention and protecting our brick and mortar. We've been talking about a statewide school for probably 3 years. We want to now accelerate that using our staff to be able to get that done. We've been talking to St. Mary's about the establishment of an international residency program where they will house our students. Those talks are going very well. We want to talk about a learning lab, and a learning lab at the next elementary school that we repurpose. Imagine that school being set up for 9 weeks for the NEET experience. The next 9 weeks it's set up for junior achievement. The next 9 weeks it's set up for STEM experiments. The final 9 weeks, robotics. And our students on field trips to that learning laboratory. I think that provides some great opportunity. But that learning laboratory, not just for our students, how do we reach out and connect with homeschool networks throughout our district? How do we house a music teacher, an art teacher, a science teacher, where those strong homeschool networks, when they're looking for that level of expertise, can find it in our learning labs. one last thing, and I'm pretty excited about this because it's also in the Ready Grant, and that's that area right next to Meadows, that 30 acres. Can we turn that into an essential workers village? We already know the great work that our building trades classes do in building one house every year. The question is, can we do something uncommon there, build more houses, get more students engaged from the design to the development, to the landscaping, everything that can possibly be found there in terms of potential careers, and create a unique experience there. I will stop there, and I've got 3 minutes. Take any more questions that you might have.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. I think it's really exciting to see, I know before I ran for school board, I was looking at that strategic plan and thinking, that's really cool, I'd like to be a part of that, I'd like to help, you know? And, I don't know, some of this stuff gets me pretty excited when the weight of COVID is on us so much. You know, these are really exciting aspirational goals, and thank you for the work.
I think those people right over there.
Now, if you could just get this one accomplished in 1 year as well, that'd be great.
That would be uncommon.
That would be uncommon. It is exciting, it is exciting. We have to stick to our goals and pursue all the avenues we can to make it a fruition. So, I'm on.
So real quickly, before we leave, we know that next week, we need to schedule a very short board meeting as a part of our teacher contract. We come back on the 15th at the regular board meeting, and then I will be asking the president to reach out to you in regards to a special meeting on December the 1st. So, we got a busy November. Look forward to seeing you all at our community meeting. We're also holding them in elementary and middle schools in the morning. You're welcome. We are serving, Karen?
Cinnamon rolls, coffee, milk and juice.
Okay, and they actually put this cinnamon on the rolls while you're there, so I'm very pleased.
Well, I will be absent for 3 weeks in November, I'm very sorry to say.
All right,
But I will
we'll
come
get your
back
roll.
full strength, full steam.
We'll get your roll that way.
Yeah. okay,
Board,
yes,
thank you.
you.
Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you. The next business meeting will be November 15th, as scheduled. So, this meeting's adjourned.